Hi, I'm Amy from A Rooney Designs, and today I'm here to share with you some basic tips and tricks for creating wool applique so you can make beautiful things like these cute mini pillows from my Mini Pillow for All Seasons pattern. I'm going to show you how to cut out your pattern pieces easily, how to position them on the fabric where you want to place them, and how to stitch them down. I hope you'll join me as we go into wool applique basics. The first thing that we need for our wool felt applique is our pattern pieces. You can print it out onto regular printer paper, or you can print it onto freezer paper depending on the method that you are using. We'll talk about freezer paper here in a minute. So no matter whether you're using it on regular paper or freezer paper, the next thing that you will need to do is cut out around each of your pattern pieces, leaving a slight margin of paper around each one. Now, if you have pieces that are going to be the same color, like the stems of these strawberries here, you can cut around the entire area of all the green together. You don't need to separate each of them individually unless you want to. But if they're all going to be the same color, you can totally leave them as a group. Once you have your pattern pieces cut out, now it's time to decide which method you want to use to cut out your pattern pieces. So the first one I'm going to talk about is just a simple stapler. I have this little mini one that sits in my craft room. It's super cute and really easy. All you're going to do is take your pattern piece, put it on top of your felt, and then you're just going to staple it into place. You want to make sure that your staples are close enough together to give a really good hold between the paper and the felt, especially when you're going around detailed areas like the thumb of this mitten. If you think that this is going to give you some trouble and not lay as close to the felt as you like, you could add another staple in there if you want to hold it a little more securely. Then all you're going to do is take a good pair of scissors and cut it out, and then you'll have your pattern piece like this. The last step, if using the stapler method, is just to remove the stapler. I have this super simple staple remover. I got it at an office store or even probably just a big box store. And then you're just going to pull out the staples. Sometimes they don't bend as much as you want, but they're really easy to get out. And then you can see once you've removed those staples, you can't even tell where the holes were from the staple. So staplers is a great way to do it. And the benefit of that is, just like this next method we're going to use, is you can just use your regular printer paper. So this is another product that you can use. It's called Pattern and Stencil Adhesive. This is from ThermoWeb. It is a very light tack, repositionable adhesive. And all you will do is spray the back of your pattern piece with the pattern spray, set it on top of your pattern piece, cut it out, and then peel it right off. It's a super quick and easy way to do it. And again, it's really handy for just using your regular paper. The one disadvantage I think of this one is you have to worry about overspray as you're spraying your pattern pieces and stuff. And so I like it as a method, but my preferred method is actually freezer paper. I like to buy sheets of freezer paper like this. I will get them just on Amazon, or you may even be able to find them at your local quilt shop. And I like these sheets because they can just go straight through your printer. So when I'm printing out my pattern, I will print my pattern pieces onto the freezer paper. You do want to make sure that you are printing it onto the paper side of the freezer paper and not the waxy side. The one downside of this is that I find with my printer, at least, I have to feed the sheets in one at a time, just to make sure with the waxy side on the one side, it tends to pull more than one sheet through, which leads to paper jams and things like that. So I just print one sheet of the pattern at a time, and then it's ready to go. Then what you'll do is, again, separate your pieces according to color. And then you're going to use your iron on medium heat with no steam, and you're just going to quickly press the freezer paper to your felt. The freezer paper has a waxy side, and that heat melts the wax and sticks it to your felt. Then again, you'll just use your scissors and cut it out. And then the freezer paper, you can just peel it right off. So I like this method. Your freezer paper pieces, your pattern pieces are reusable if you'd like. And it doesn't, again, leave any tell signs on, on the felt piece itself. So Any of these methods work equally well. It's really just a matter of preference, what you have on hand, what's easy and convenient for you. Once you have all of your pattern pieces, then we're going to move to getting our applique onto our fabric where we want it to go. So one tip that I have for this is to keep in mind your border and your perimeter around your applique that you are going to be doing. In this case, this is going to become the centerpiece of this mini pillow. So I am going to have 1/4 of an inch seam allowance that I need to account for, as well as just making sure that I have a little bit of a buffer because I don't want any of my applique getting caught in that seam allowance. Now, if I am doing something like this mini banner that I have, then I am going to keep in mind where I am going to be positioning it, if I've already sewn my flags together, if I still need to sew them together. So you just want to make sure that you're keeping in mind any seam allowances that you might need to account for as you position your applique onto the fabric that you are doing. Once you kind of have your pieces decided where you want them to go, I'm going to kind of center my little watermelon fruit here. Then I like to use a little bit of a glue stick. Now this is a fabric glue stick, but you could really use even just a washable school glue stick. And then I'm just going to put just the tiniest little hint of glue right in the center and then stick my applique in place. We don't want to add a lot of glue, especially if we're going to be going back and adding details. So for example, on this watermelon, I'm going to be going back and adding seeds eventually. And I don't want to have to work any harder than I need to stitching through that glue. So you just want to add the lightest touch of glue that you can, but you still want to make sure that your wool applique is going to stay in place. Sometimes as you're stitching, if you're not paying attention, you can kind of shift your applique a little bit and you might start stitching over here and it's all lined up, and then when you get over to this end, it's a little off. So adding that little bit of glue helps to keep everything into place as you're stitching around. Then you're going to take your felt and then take your embroidery floss. I prefer to use 1 strand of floss, and I like to have my, when I'm stitching down, in this case, I am going to use coordinating floss. And this is really just a matter of preference. If you use a contrasting floss, it's going to make your stitches stand out a lot, which is a totally awesome look. And if that's what you're going for, that may be exactly what you want to do. I find that most of the time I want my wool applique to kind of be what steals the show. And so I will not add contrasting stitches. I just will add stitches that match with floss that matches my felt, just to make sure that those stitches stay hidden. If you are beginning and just new at stitching applique into place, I strongly recommend using coordinating floss instead of contrasting floss. So floss that is close to the color of your felt, because it helps hide your stitches as well. So if they're a little bit off in length or they aren't exactly spaced perfectly, which of course this is handwork, so nothing is supposed to be perfect, it just helps you hide a little bit any of those nuances that you might have. Now that we have our floss onto our needle and thread, we are going to start stitching down the fruit of this watermelon. I like to use just a basic whip stitch. You could totally use a blanket stitch if you want, but I find that the whip stitch is really straightforward and not complicated, and a great way to start in your journey of wool applique. To do a whip stitch, you're just going to come up from the back, and then I have a knot in my thread. If you are going to put your wool applique onto something like in a frame or something, and you want that knot to not be there, there's lots of techniques you can use for hiding the end of your thread, doing a stay stitch and things like that. But I find, especially like this, where it's just going to go into a little pillow, it's absolutely just the easiest way to add just a little stitch or just a little knot. Okay, so a whip stitch, you're going to come up and then you're just going to come down as close to that felt as you can. And then I'm going to move over. And the only trick with with the whip stitch is you're trying to get your stitches the same length and the same width apart. So you're just trying to make them as even as you can. Now, again, this is handwork. There is going to be some variation and some, you know, differences, and that is totally fine. But you're just going to keep working your stitches all the way around until you have your piece stitched down. I have a couple of tips for like this rind here, the white part. Now I decided to not have 3 separate pieces. And so the white part, originally I was gonna have this white part be just a bigger version of this, but it was really thick stitching through 3 layers. So this is a really skinny piece of felt. And felt has some play to it and some stretch. So what I recommend when you're doing something that's long and skinny like this is line up one end, and then you're going to stitch all the way around. And when you get to the second end, you may have a little bit of overhang. So I don't know if you can see that right there. The way I have it right now, which may or may not be the way it ends up once it's all stitched. But if you end up with a little overhang like that, you can just snip it off. And another thing I suggest, you have 2 options when it comes to stitching this down. The first one is to stitch almost all the way, but not quite through or across that entire piece. And this is the method that I preferred for this one because I like that it kind of pushes that edge of the felt and butts it up a little bit closer to that pink fruit piece. But you can see on this one, maybe you can see on this one, that I have stitched all the way across the white on that piece. And I actually like that look as well. It just gives it a little bit more separation and definition between the white and the pink. So if that's a look that you want, then that might be an option for what you want to go for. I hope what you're hearing most from me here is that it's totally your piece and you can stitch it however you want. Because that's the beauty of making it yourself, is you can make it exactly how you want it. So you're just going to go through and you're going to add all of your pieces, add your layers as you go. This particular version of the watermelon pillow, I decided to add a little flower with a center. So I have to get all of my watermelon stitched down first. Then I'm going to come back and add the next layer on top, which will be my flower. So in the case of like this pumpkin here, we have our back piece, then we have our center piece, and then we have our leaf piece. So you'll just want to go through and add them in layers as you go, kind of keeping in mind, typically what I'll do is kind of audition all the pieces together at first. It's handy if you have your phone handy or whatever to just snap a quick picture so you can kind of remember how you organized them and how you wanted them to lay. And then I will just glue down the bottom layer while they're all still in position. So I would pull up these leaves, pull up the center, and then add just a little dab of glue to keep these big pumpkin bases in place. Then I'll come back and add the centers, and then I'll add my leaves. It's really a super fun process, and you'll quickly find that wool felt applique is beautiful. Now, I wanted to mention one quick thing about using the felt. I do recommend wool felt applique, or wool felt for the applique. It just has such a really nice hand. It stitches beautifully and it's going to last for a really long time. You have gorgeous colors to choose from. It's really dense and it doesn't create the pilling that a lot of acrylic felt will do. You can obviously, of course, do this with acrylic felt, but I think you'll find that wool blend felt just gives it a little extra richness and depth, and your project will stand the test of time if you use it. The final thing with wool felt applique is that you can go through, and I guess I should show you on this one, and add some embellishing stitches with embroidery stitches. Now these are just plain back stitches, but I wanted to add some veining and some detail to those leaves. Or you can use different stitches to do your wool felt applique. So in this case, I am using a running stitch. I actually used French knots to tack down those corners there. These are little lazy daisy stitches. So it doesn't always have to be a whip stitch. This is just a regular back stitch around it. It totally creates a different look depending on the kind of stitch that you use to stitch down your applique. So feel free to play around with the different stitches, different positioning, different layering, all different kinds of things, and you'll find that wool felt applique is a super fun technique, and you'll find yourself embellishing more than just mini pillows once you get going. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you'll like and subscribe my channel, and follow along for more tutorials from A. Marini Designs.